No one would remember later who saw her first. Perhaps it was the boy playing with his wooden hoop by the fountain, or maybe the woman sweeping dust in front of her shop. What is certain is that at some point during that sweltering afternoon, the figure appeared at the end of Tierra Seca's main street. She walked as if the entire world weighed on her shoulders. The midday sun beat down vertically, relentlessly, turning every step into torture. The woman staggered forward, with two small children clinging to her hands. Her clothes, once colorful, now hung torn and covered in road dust. Her dark hair fell in disarray over her face, barely concealing lips chapped by thirst. One of the merchants looked up from his stall and frowned, then another and another. Like ripples on a pond, silence spread through the market square. Conversations broke off mid-sentence. The children stopped playing. Even the blacksmith stopped his hammer on the anvil. Everyone was watching. The woman kept walking. Oblivious to the stares, or too exhausted to care, each step seemed harder than the last. The older boy, maybe 5 years old, tried to walk upright, but his legs trembled visibly. The little girl wept silently, tears leaving clean trails on her dirty cheeks. They reached the center of the plaza, right where the 4 main roads of the town converged, right where everyone could see her. And then it happened. The woman's legs gave way like dry twigs. She collapsed to her knees with a thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The children fell with her, but clung to their mother, frightened by the strange faces surrounding them. "Please," the woman's voice was a broken whisper she could barely hear. "Water, food for my children." The words came out in Spanish, but with an accent no one in Tierra Seca recognized. It wasn't the Spanish of the ranchers in the south, nor that of the traders from the coast. It was different, strange, difficult to understand. A woman took a step back. "What's she saying?" "I don't know." "She speaks strangely," another replied, squinting. "Where did she come from?" murmured a man in a stained apron. A crowd began to form, but it was a strange crowd. A circle of people watching but not approaching, as if there were an invisible line no one wanted to cross. Faces showed curiosity, distrust, discomfort. Some showed pity, but even they looked away when the woman's pleading eyes sought them out. "My children," the woman tried again, this time mixing words in broken English. "Please help, children. Hungry. I can't quite understand what she's saying," commented the baker, crossing his arms. "Me neither," added the owner of the fabric shop. "What if she's come from somewhere in trouble?" "Exactly," Gertaeus agreed the butcher. "We don't know who she is, where she's come from, what she's done. She could be anyone." A man in a straw hat pointed at the children. "But look at those little ones. You can't trust strangers," the blacksmith interrupted. "They could bring trouble to the town. Flint, Belki, Bashimusadir, Tazar. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and please comment on what country you're watching from. That makes us very happy and helps us continue bringing you the best stories of the Old West." The kneeling woman began to sway. Her lips moved silently, perhaps in prayer. The little girl sobbed uncontrollably. Her sharp cry cut through the air. The older boy gritted his teeth, trying to be strong, but tears streamed freely down his dusty cheeks. The seconds ticked by, heavy as stones. From across the square, by the watering trough where the horses rested, a man slowly rose. He was tall, powerfully built, sculpted by years in the sun. A wide-brimmed hat partially obscured his face, but everyone could see it. The dry earth recognized that silhouette. Flint, the solitary cowboy who had arrived in town 3 years ago and had lived on the outskirts ever since, speaking little but observing much. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair. For a long moment he stood motionless, watching the scene. Something changed in his expression. A muscle tensed in his jaw. He replaced his hat and began to walk. The sound of his boots against the dry earth was the only sound. Step after step, firm and determined. His spurs jingled softly, creating a rhythm that seemed to mark the heartbeat of the entire town. The crowd instinctively parted, not out of fear, but out of respect. Flint wasn't one to look for trouble, but neither was he one to avoid it when he encountered injustice. He stopped in front of the kneeling woman. She slowly raised her gaze, as if struggling to focus. Her eyes were sunken with weariness, framed by dark circles. But when she finally managed to see the "thank you," the woman whispered. Flint nodded silently. "Flint, be careful," a voice warned. "We don't know who she is. She could cause trouble." The cowboy stood slowly, turned his head, and scanned each face. He didn't say a word, but there was something in his gray eyes that made several people take a step back. He turned and walked toward the trader's store. Don Ramiro's store smelled of new leather and dried spices. Sacks of flour rested against the wooden walls, and tools, ropes, and pieces of harness hung from the ceiling. It was the commercial heart of Tierra Seca, the place where everyone bought what they needed to survive in the desert. Don Ramiro looked up when Flint entered. The trader was a robust man with a thick mustache and hands calloused from years of work. He knew everyone in town, their secrets, their debts, their needs. Flint greeted him, but his tone was cautious. He had seen what had just happened outside. The cowboy approached the counter without a word. He pointed, fresh bread resting in a wicker basket, a large piece of cheese wrapped in cloth, dried jerky hanging from a hook, apples in a barrel, a small bag of beans. Don Ramiro didn't move immediately. He crossed his arms and looked directly at Flint. "I know who this is for," he said quietly. Although in the empty store there was no one else who could hear, Flint held his gaze without blinking. "Look, Flint," the shopkeeper continued, lowering his voice even more. "I understand you want to help. You're a good man. You always have been. But that woman outside, nobody knows who she is. She speaks a strange Spanish, different from ours. Where does she come from? Why is she alone with those children in the middle of the desert?" The cowboy remained silent, but he reached into his vest pocket and took out several silver coins. He placed them on the counter one by one with slow, deliberate movements. Deliberate. The metallic clang echoed in the still air of the store. Don Ramiro sighed deeply. "It's not about money, and you know it. It's just that people are already talking. They say maybe he's running from something bad that could bring trouble to the town. You know how it is, Flint? A small town, everyone knows each other, and suddenly someone appears that no one understands." "Did you see those children?" Flint's voice cut through the air like a knife. They were the first words he'd spoken since he'd come in. The shopkeeper blinked, surprised by the question. "Did you see them?" Flint repeated, and there was something in his tone that brooked no evasion. "Yes, of course I saw them. But then you know they're hungry, you know they're scared, you know their mother would do anything to keep them alive." Flint paused, and his gray eyes hardened. "Or that doesn't matter anymore in Tierra Seca." Don Ramiro lowered his gaze, remained silent for a long moment, and then, without saying anything more, began to pick up the items that Flint had pointed out. He wrapped them in brown paper with efficient movements, tying the package with thick twine. "Here," he said finally, pushing the package across the counter. He scooped up the coins with one hand, but with the other added 2 more oranges to the wrapping. "For the children, no charge." Flint nodded briefly, took the package, and headed for the door. "Flint," Don Ramiro called just before he left. The cowboy stopped, but didn't turn around. "Be careful. People can be cruel when they're afraid. And right now they're afraid of what they don't understand." The cowboy left without answering. Outside, the sun was still beating down relentlessly on the plaza. The woman and her children remained where he had left them, kneeling in the hot dust. Some onlookers had dispersed, uncomfortable with the scene, but others remained in the shadows of the buildings, watching, murmuring among themselves. Flint walked straight toward the family. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each step. When he reached them, he knelt again on the scorching earth, not caring that his clothes were getting dirty. He placed the package between himself and the woman. She stared at him with huge eyes brimming with tears she hadn't yet shed. She looked at the package, then at Flint, then back at the package, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "No, I can't," she began in her broken Spanish, mixing in words from another language Flint didn't recognize. I don't have any money. I can't pay." Flint opened the wrapping, revealing the bread, the cheese, the fruit. The aroma of fresh food made the children visibly shudder. The little girl let out a longing sigh. The cowboy pushed the package closer to them. The woman shook her head, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. "I can't. It's not fair. You don't know me. I could be. You're hungry," Flint said simply. "Your children are hungry. That's all I need to know." For a moment, the woman simply. She looked as if she were seeing more than just a cowboy kneeling before her, as if she were seeing kindness in a world that had shown her mostly cruelty. Finally, with trembling hands, she took a piece of bread, divided it into 3 parts, but when she went to give it to her children, the oldest boy stopped her hand. The little boy took his portion and broke it in half, giving the larger half to his sister. The little girl did the same, trying to give a piece back to her mother. Flint watched this in silence, and something stirred inside his chest. An old, painful memory from another time, other children, another family that no longer existed. He stood slowly, looked around the plaza, and saw the faces watching him from the windows, from the half-open doors, from the corners of the buildings. Some faces showed silent approval, others obvious disapproval, but all were watching. "Stay here," he said to the woman in slow, clear Spanish. "Don't move. I'll be back soon." She nodded, still with tears in her eyes. In his eyes, while his children ate with the controlled desperation of those who have known true hunger. Flint straightened his hat and walked to the far end of the village, where the buildings became less frequent and the wilderness began. There, at the edge of dry earth, stood an old, abandoned stable. No one had used it since its owner had died 2 winters ago. No one except Flint, who sometimes kept his horse there when he needed to stay in town for more than a day. He pushed open the wooden door, which creaked on its rusty hinges. Inside, sunlight filtered through the loose roof boards, creating golden patterns on the earthen floor. It smelled of old wood and dry wood, but it was clean, sheltered from the brutal sun, and spacious enough. Flint looked inside with a critical eye. It might work, at least temporarily. He turned and walked back toward the square, his mind already working on what he needed to do next. The stable smelled of old wood and silence. Flint pushed the door harder this time, making sure it would open easily. The light of the setting sun filtered through the cracks in the walls, creating golden lines on the packed earth floor. There was enough room. One corner was relatively clean, sheltered from the drafts. He could put blankets there, create a place to sleep. The roof had a few holes, but nothing that couldn't be patched up with boards. Satisfied with what he saw, Flint returned to the main square. The woman and her children were still exactly where he had left them. They had finished eating, but sat in the dust, as if unsure what to do next. The square had emptied considerably. Most people had gone back to their homes, though Flint could feel their eyes on him from the windows. He approached the family and gestured, "Come, follow me." The woman hesitated, looked at her children, then at Flint, clearly unsure whether to trust him. "A place to sleep," Flint tried to explain, gesturing with his hands. Roof, shade, safety. The word safety seemed to resonate within her. She nodded slowly and stood with difficulty, helping her children to their feet. Together they followed Flint through the dusty, dry earth streets. The path to the barn wasn't long, but each step felt heavy. The children's bare feet left small footprints in the dirt. The woman walked with a hand on each of her children's shoulders, as if afraid they might disappear if she let go. When they reached the barn, Flint opened the door wide. The woman went in first, looking around with wary eyes. Then slowly, an expression of relief began to soften the lines of tension on her face. "It's okay," she murmured in Spanish. "It's good. Thank you." Flint nodded and pointed to the most protected corner. "You can stay here. I'll get blankets, fresh water from the well." Over the next hour, Flint went back and forth several times. He brought 2 blankets, thick pieces of wood from his own house, a bucket of clean water from the communal well, an oil lamp for when night fell. He even found some old boards and nails to repair the larger holes in the roof. The woman watched him work in silence, her expression growing with amazement. When Flint finished nailing the last board, she approached timidly. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why are you doing this for us? You don't know us. You don't know who we are." Flint lowered his hammer and turned to face her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then in a calm voice he replied, "I don't need to know who you are to see that you need help." The woman's eyes filled with tears again. She placed a hand on her chest. "My name is Rosa," she said slowly, enunciating each word carefully. "These are my children, Miguel and Sofia." The older child, Miguel, stepped forward and extended his small hand toward Flint with a seriousness that belied his age. "The cowboy." He shook her hand gently. "Flint," he introduced himself. Rosa nodded as if memorizing the name. Then taking a deep breath, she began to speak. The words came out in halting Spanish, mixed with another language, but Flint could understand enough. Her village was far away to the south, beyond the mountains. For years they had lived in peace, growing corn and raising goats. But then came the drought. It didn't rain for 2 whole seasons. The crops died, the animals died, the people began to get sick. "My husband," Rosa's voice broke. "He got sick, a very high fever. There was no doctor, no medicine. I tried to save him, but he stopped, unable to go on." Miguel hugged his mother around the waist. Sofia clung to her skirt. "When he died," Rosa continued, "after a moment I knew I had to leave. There was nothing left in the village, no food, no water, no future. I took my children and started walking north. I was told there were villages here, work, hope. How long have you been here?" "Walking?" Flint asked. Rosa thought for a moment. 3 weeks, maybe more. I lost count of the days. Flint felt a tightness in his chest. 3 weeks walking through the desert with 2 small children, no money, not enough supplies, not knowing what they would find at the end of the road. I had to beg in other villages, Rosa admitted, looking down in shame. Some gave us food, others turned us away. In one place, a man tried to take Sophia. He said he would give me money for her. Anger flashed through Flint like lightning. What did you do? I grabbed my children and ran all night until I couldn't any more. Rosa looked up and there was fierceness in her eyes. Now no one will take my children from me. I'd rather die than allow it. Flint nodded slowly. He recognized that determination. He had seen it before, in the mirror, in her own eyes, many years ago. You don't have to worry about that here, he said firmly. As long as you're in dry land, no one will hurt you. No one will touch your children. Rosa looked at him intently. Why are you helping us, Mr. Flint? I really need to understand. Everyone else in the plaza looked at me with fear, with contempt. But you knelt in the dust, gave me water, brought food. Now you're giving us shelter. Why? Flint was silent for so long that Rosa thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, more distant, as if he were speaking from a very far away. A long time ago, I too had a family, a wife, a little girl. Rosa caught her breath, feeling the weight of what was to come. There was a fire in our house, Flint continued, looking towards some point beyond the barn walls. I was out working on the ranch. When I saw the smoke and came back, it was too late. I found them outside the house. My wife had managed to get our daughter out, but the smoke overcame them both. I'm so sorry, Rosa whispered. After the funeral, I left that place. I couldn't stay. I started wandering, working on different ranches, in different towns, never staying long in any one place. Flint looked directly at her now, and in every town he saw families, mothers with their children, and he always thought, if my wife had needed help that day, if she had been alone with our daughter, someone would have helped her, or they would have left her on her knees, in the dust, begging for a little water. Rosa put a hand to her mouth, understanding. So when I saw you today, Flint shrugged. I didn't see a stranger. I saw a mother willing to die for her children, and I knew I had to help. The next morning arrived with a heat that promised to be merciless. Flint woke up early as usual, and the first thing he did was walk to the barn to check on Rosa and her children. He found them awake. Rosa had cleaned the space as best she could with what little she had. The blankets were folded carefully, and the children looked rested, though still haggard from prolonged hunger. Good morning, Flint greeted, tipping his hat. Good morning, Mr. Flint, Rosa replied with a small bow. Thank you for everything. We slept well. The children didn't have nightmares for the first time in weeks. The cowboy nodded and handed them a bag of fresh bread and milk he had bought on his way. Eat up. You need to regain your strength. While the family ate breakfast, Flint leaned against the barn wall, thinking about what was to come. He knew the town wouldn't easily accept Rosa and her children. Dry Land was a small, closed-off place where anything different bred suspicion. He didn't have to wait long to be sure. Around noon, as Flint helped Rosa mend her torn clothes using a needle and thread he had managed to get, he heard voices approaching, serious, masculine voices with that tone men used when they came to impose their will. He stood up just as 5 men appeared in front of the barn. Leading them was Emmett Johnson, the leader of the town council. He was a heavy-set man with a gray beard and small eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. Beside him stood other prominent members, the hotel owner, the postmaster, and 2 ranchers from the outskirts. Flint, Emmett said without preamble. We need to talk. The cowboy crossed his arms over his chest. Talk, not here. This is council business. Come to the town hall. Now. Flint glanced behind him, where Rosa watched the scene with frightened eyes, keeping her children behind her. Then he looked back at Emmett. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Emmett clenched his jaw. He was clearly not used to being contradicted. Fine, if that's what you want, he gestured toward the barn. That woman and those children can't stay on dry land. Why not? Why not? Emmett repeated, raising his voice. Because we don't know who she is. Because she talks. A language no one fully understands, because she appeared out of nowhere. No money, no ID, no way to prove she isn't a fugitive or a thief. Have you seen her steal anything? Flint asked with dangerous calm. No, but she's threatened someone, hasn't she? Yet, has she caused any trouble in town? That's not the point, Emmett exploded. The point is, we don't know her, and these days we can't afford to take in just anyone who crawls into our town. One of the ranchers, a thin man named Caldwell, stepped forward. Flint, you have to understand our position. We're a small town. We have limited resources. We can't take in every tramp who comes through here. No one's asking you to take anyone in, Flint replied. I'm taking care of her and her kids. With what? Emmett asked sarcastically. You're a cowboy, Flint. You work for wages. You don't own a ranch or land or anything but yourself, horse, and your saddle. How do you plan to support 3 more people? That's my problem, not yours. The hotel owner, a bald man named Patterson, chimed in more gently, trying to be reasonable. Flint, we appreciate your kind heart. We all know you're a decent man, but you have to think about the village too. What will happen when others see we've taken this woman in? More will come, and then more, and soon we won't have enough water, enough food, enough work for everyone. She's a person, not an invasion, Flint said. She's a stranger, Emmett shouted, losing her patience. And the rules are clear. Anyone who wants to settle on dry land must be approved by the council. They must prove they have the means to support themselves. They must have references. Must have what? Flint's voice cut through the air like a whip. They must have the right skin color, the right accent, the right story. Don't put words in my mouth. Emmett took a threatening step toward. This has nothing to do with that. It has to do with protecting our people. Protecting them from what? From a widowed mother with 2 starving children, from the unknown, from potential trouble, from your own fear, Flint finished. His voice was low now, but there was steel in every word. That's what you want to protect the people from, your fear of what you don't understand. A heavy silence fell over the men. Emmett was breathing heavily, his face flushed with anger. The others looked uncomfortably between Flint and their leader. Finally, Emmett spoke, his voice as cold as ice. The council will meet this afternoon. We'll vote on whether this woman can stay. And Flint, let me be clear. If we vote no, we expect you to respect the people's decision, or what? Flint asked, his hand moving almost imperceptibly to his belt, where his revolver hung. The gesture did not go unnoticed. Caldwell and Patterson automatically took a step back. Emmett stiffened, his eyes darting between Flint's face and his hand. No, we want trouble, Patterson said quickly. Nobody wants violence. Then there won't be any, Flint replied, but his hand didn't move. As long as nobody tries to throw a defenseless mother and her children into the desert to die. Emmett took a step back, trying to maintain his dignity. The meeting is at 3 p.m. at the town hall. You can come if you want. We'll hear your position. I'll be there. The 5 men turned and started to walk away, but Emmett stopped after a few steps and looked back. Flint, one last thing. Think carefully about what you're doing. You're putting a stranger above your own people, above the people you've lived with for 3 years. Is it really worth losing all that for someone you don't even know? Flint held his gaze, unblinking. If this town is willing to let a mother and her children die out of fear, then it's not a town worth preserving. Emmett shook his head slowly, as if he were watching a man commit a crime. A terrible mistake. Then he left, followed by the others. When they were gone, Rosa came out of the barn. She had been listening to everything, though she didn't fully understand the rapid English they had spoken. But she had picked up on the tone, the tension, the danger. Mr. Flint, she said, her voice trembling. I don't want to cause any trouble. Maybe I should go. We can keep walking, find another place. No, Flint said firmly, turning to face her. You've walked enough. The clock in the town hall tower struck 3 o'clock. When Flint entered the building, the meeting room was packed. Not only the council was present, but also many townspeople who had heard about the meeting and wanted to witness what would happen. Emmett Johnson presided from his usual place, flanked by the other 4 council members. Their faces were stern, determined. Flint recognized that expression. They had already made their decision before it even began. The meeting. Flint, Emmett began with an exaggerated formality. Thank you for coming. We have called this extraordinary meeting to discuss the situation of the woman and children who arrived in town yesterday. The cowboy stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, saying nothing. As everyone knows, Emmett continued, Dryland has clear rules about who can settle here. These rules exist to protect our citizens, to ensure that our limited resources are used responsibly. There were murmurs of approval from some of those present. This woman who says her name is Rosa does not meet any of our requirements. She has no means of support, no references. She cannot even communicate properly with us." Emmett addressed Flint directly. "Therefore, the council has decided that she must leave Dryland tomorrow at dawn." Before Flint could reply, a voice came from the back of the room. "Hold on a minute." All heads turned. It was the How. She knelt in the dust. How she shared her water. How she bought food with her own money. How she gave her shelter. She paused, letting her words sink in. "And I was ashamed, Mrs. Clara," Emmett began. "I haven't finished." Her voice resonated with unexpected authority. "I was ashamed because I remembered when I arrived in this village 30 years ago. I arrived alone, a widow, penniless, fleeing problems that weren't my fault. I arrived with only the clothes on my back and a baby in my arms. The silence in the room was absolute now, and this village accepted me. They gave me work. They gave me shelter. They gave me a chance to start over." Her eyes filled with tears. "If you had rejected me, then my son and I would have died in the desert. But you didn't, because this village back then understood what compassion meant." She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief and continued, "Now, you want to throw out a mother and her children because you're afraid. Afraid there won't be enough food. Afraid she'll bring trouble. Fear of the different." Her voice hardened. "But let me tell you something. A people who lose their compassion are already dead. They just don't know it yet." Mrs. Clara addressed Emmett directly. "You vote to throw this woman out, Emmett. But do you remember who took care of you when your mother died? Do you remember who fed you when your father lost everything in the drought?" Emmett looked down uncomfortably. "It was me," the old woman said. "Me, the stranger this town took in. Me, who had nothing to offer except my willingness to work hard." She turned to the rest of the audience, "And I wasn't alone. Half of you are here because at some point someone gave you a chance when you needed it most." There were murmurs among the people. Some nodded slowly. Then another voice rose. Dr. Heiss, a middle-aged man with round glasses. "Mrs. Clara, you're right. This morning I went to the stable to examine the woman and her children." Emmett stiffened. "You did what?" "My duty as a doctor," Heiss replied calmly. "And I found that